everyone, welcome to this afternoon's Open Creative Space live stream. Here at Learn, we believe that making is what makes us human. We make, therefore we are. Today's session is for educators who want to get into making and STEAM activities with their students, whether you're online or in the classroom. You can follow us on our website at ocs.learnquebec.ca, where we post ideas of activities and resources for students and for educators. So before we begin, I just wanted to mention why. Why are we so keen and passionate about making and the STEAM maker mindset here at Learn? So it's for several reasons. The first one, play and inventing, creating, and tinkering is good for all ages. This is true for kids as well as for grown-ups. It allows you to see materials in different ways. You get your hands busy, you get to tinker, you get to experience materials in different ways. When we're talking about stop motion, Chris will talk about materials. However, material-wise, you can use anything and everything. The making process allows to experiment with a diversity of solutions. In other words, there's not just one best and good way of doing something. And it allows for lots of creativity, collaboration, and engagement, especially in today's context with online learning. We're looking for ways to engage students and getting them to collaborate online. Last but not least, today's takeaway, students get comfortable with the design process. So the design process leads to amazing productions in stop motion and deep learning. Now for today's session, we will be demoing and sharing tips and tricks on how to integrate stop motion in your classroom. Stop motion can be used for a variety of activities. It could be to tell stories or to demonstrate concepts. We'll address that during the live stream today. It's great for all levels and all subject areas, elementary, high school. It's remarkably versatile to do with your students. And in a nutshell, it's easy, engaging, and fun. A fun way for students to demonstrate their learning, but it's also a quick way for the teacher to identify which students didn't quite understand the concept that was being taught. So I'm actually a former high school math teacher, and when I run into students, they often tell me, I remember this concept that you taught because we actually did a stop motion activity. They remember that activity and they remember that concept without even trying. So it's a remarkable activity to do with your students. They love the process and they love the opportunity to create to express their creativity. So are you familiar with this? The bird and the cage. This is called a thaumatrope. And it's actually one of the earliest kind of stop motion. It's a combination of two images that are combined together to create the illusion of motion. So these are two images that are combined. More recently, especially with social media, there's a lot of GIFs that are going around. You can create GIFs using phones on your telephone. Here's an example of two images that were combined in a loop. So two images combined to make motion. And if we think even further, or the bigger picture, when I think stop motion animation, I always think of Wallace and Gromit. So these are amazing, mind-blowing productions of stop motion. We're going to talk about what frames per second are, but this is 24 frames per second. So the frequency at which consecutive images appear on display. So these are different types of stop motion animation. In STEAM activities, just like stop motion, it's really important to remember the design process before you jump into creating and playing with the different materials. So process. We need a purpose for making the things that we make. As a teacher, you have to ask yourself before starting, what is your pedagogical intention? What do you want your students to do? Do you want them to create a simple story? Do you want them to make an animation of the human anatomy? Do you want them to have a character move from point A to point B? So these steps beforehand are crucial. You could jump in and just make a stop motion animation, but it won't be as good as if students had prepared. So students have to understand the content and the process of how to go about doing it. The planning part is super important. Some examples that I have here are story maps that you can use with your students. So before creating their productions, students can analyze the setting, the characters, beginning, middle, and end. They can draw and write scripts. You could also create a storyboard. So here you have the different scenes and the sets that students can draw and write in. Here's an example actually of Wallace and Gromit, where you have the drawings for each scene and the script right below. So we can't emphasize this enough. Walk your students beforehand through this design process before creating. Ask them to brainstorm, to set up these storyboards, the story maps, have students discuss their intentions before creating. Then you can get creative in creating. So let's go take a look at different types of stop motion, how to set everything up, and how to integrate it in different subject areas. On to you, Chris.
Great. Thanks, Caro. And some really cool things Caro was mentioning about that process, which is super key before we get going with our hands and creating our scene. The more prep you do, the easier all the filming and stuff will be for your students. I'm going to flip over to my document camera, and we're going to look at a couple of different examples, all right, of different kinds of animation that we can do. So we're going to look at, first of all, object motion. Oh, that's really hard to see now, isn't it? Let me just turn this off. There we go, a little bit better. So the first thing is object motion, all right? Now, object motion is anything. I took a pair of scissors, I put some eyes on it, and this could be something that I could have a little animation talking about scissor safety if I wanted to, okay? Any kind of object that I can manipulate, I can animate, all right? As Carlo said, well, Craig will get more into this of how to go about doing it, but any object I can turn into a moving object, all right? So motion object. We also have claymation, all right? Now, I have a little example here of claymation. So it's made out of clay. I could use Play-Doh as well if I wanted to. So here's a little idea I had. You could integrate this into the science classroom when you're looking at states of matter. So here are all my little molecules, right? And I'm going to put them together so they look like a solid. And if you wanted to, I could draw on this paper a little container if I wanted to, right? I could draw a little container. And then what I would animate is as my heat, the energy moves closer to the molecules, I could animate them dispersing, right? So there's one little idea that I could use for animation. You're going to see too on our activity page, we have a bunch of claymation ideas that you can use. So any kind of Play-Doh, plasticine works very well together. The next one is pixelation. And again, don't worry about taking note of all these. We've made an activity page for you where all this is on there. So pixelation is basically using our bodies. I don't know if you guys remember those Expedia ads that have been airing like crazy over the holidays. That is pixelation. They're using characters in real life to animate. So I could animate my hand, I could animate a body. And again, most of the time when you're doing pixelation, you're working on a flat surface. So say, for example, my hand is a human. Well, it is kind of human, but I could then animate my hand by taking a picture, changing it, moving it, doing maybe sign language or something like that as well. So pixelation using bodies to animate. We also have something called cutout motion. Okay, now let me show you this one. Here's a little example I put together. And this one was for looking at the seasons. Okay, so yeah, that's a tree. It's kind of weird, but so it's a tree. And then what I did is I cut out these leaves. And what I could do is I could have the leaves growing. I could have them changing color, right? And all the while I'm animating, I'm taking several, like lots of pictures of this, and then I'm going to sequence them together. So I can animate just about anything on paper as well. I could have had cutout characters as well and had a little schoolhouse here and then animated that as well. So using cutouts is really fun, and you just need paper basically and some pencils, crayons, or markers or something like that. The next thing is puppet animation. So you could do the process of creating puppets. And I did something similar to what Caro showed us with her bird in the cage, except what I did is I made a puppet kind of character and I put it on a dowel, right? So again, this is great for elementary kids, right? Because they only have to do 2 pictures. And then what you do to animate it is you put it between your fingers and I just rotate it, right? And then you start to kind of get this illusion of the character jumping up. So this is super fun for kids when you're starting in like kindergarten, pre-K even, because I mean, it's just cut out and then I just use some tape to tape it together and then it just spins away. So another really cool idea. And this could be also, I could use as a puppet too, as a stand-up, right? So I could have more developed characters and stuff like that. The second to last one is called Flipbooks. Now, I'm sure you've gone through some of these as you're, here's a little ball that kind of goes from one side to the other. And basically what you do is I just cut out a piece of cardboard and I cut it into these shapes. I think this is 12 by 6 or something like that. Doesn't really matter. And then I just use the clip. I could have used glue, or I could have used tape as well to tape it together. And then it's just a sequence, right? So the ball moves ever slightly. And then when I put it together, it kind of looks like that ball is bouncing. Okay, so little flip books are really fun to make as well with your students. And then the last one I want to show you is a 2-picture animation, all right? And I'm going to show you one technique that can be used. So this is 2 pieces of paper. I used a little chopstick to move it. And then what you basically do is you hold it, and I just go back and forth, and by rolling it, you can start to see it starts to animate a little bit. All right, so very simple idea, but again, you can get kids starting on this super early in their learning process. It's not hard to do, and if you're using white paper, it's easy to trace, right? So I do my first picture, I put a piece of paper on top, and then I just trace and then alter it just a little bit. Now, so those are the different kinds of animations I can do. I want to talk a little bit about setup. Setup's super important. Why? Because when we're filming, we're going to be taking a ton of pictures, all right? A ton of pictures. I want to give you this ratio. 12 pictures is equal to about 1 second, all right? So if you keep that formula in mind, this kind of is a educational, I mean, once you get into your animations like Wallace and Gromit, the pictures will increase. But for our sake in education, 12 pictures for a second is a pretty good ratio, and the kids are able to do this. But a couple of the techniques that we need to be aware of is if we're using a phone or an iPad or our computers, we need to have the device in a solid spot and not move it, all right? Moving the camera or whatever I'm taking pictures with while I'm filming will cause nausea because it will be moving all around and it's really hard to watch. So key number 1 is invest in making a stand. Craig's going to show you a couple of examples, but here I just took a tube, I cut it out, and then I can slide my phone in here. And now I have a solid stand for my shooting, all right? And then what I would probably also do is I'd mark where it is so that if I ever move it, I know where to go back to right away when I start my filming. So if the period ends or whatever, I can get back to doing it. You could also invest in these fancy little, this is like a gorilla grip kind of, right? It has legs. This is about 20 bucks, 25 bucks, but making them is really fun. Another idea that I have are if you have a clamp, these work really well. Also clothespins work really well, is if I just clamp it and look at that, there's my stand. All right, so here's another technique I could use to making sure that my camera is solidly placed, all right? Really key there. Backdrops, let me show you. I'm gonna show you one of my backdrops. Okay, so what I did is I took a piece of cardboard and I put some legs on it. So I just slid these over top so that I could put it on a surface. And then I could paste on the back here my backgrounds if I wanted to. Okay, I could use just a piece of paper and then I could tape it on here. Again, so I'm creating this illusion of a scene, all right? So cardboard's super good for my backgrounds. A couple of other things too that I want you to think of is when you're shooting it, do it manually. Don't ever say, okay, take it every 3 seconds because you'll never have enough time, right? Keep that in mind as well. Lighting, very important. If it's overexposed when I'm taking pictures, it's really hard to see. So I really want you to make sure that you can kind of have the lighting to light up your scene in a nice way. And then one last thing I want you to keep in mind is the timing for audio. I see this all the time with students is they'll make an animation and they take 25 pictures. Remember the formula I gave you, 20 photos for 1 second. They end up having 2 seconds of time to say, you know, 30 seconds of words. So you have to remind your kids continuously, the more pictures, the better. The more I take of the pictures, the more animated it's going to seem. So setting up, tips and tricks. I showed you a couple of different techniques you can do. Again, all this stuff is on our activity page on our OCS blog. Back to you, Carol.
Thanks, Chris, for all those demos and ideas. You know, Chris learned all of these tips and tricks through actually making productions and doing stop motion. You're going to learn this through the process of doing so, but use these tips and tricks ahead of time. For example, for the stands, you don't need a fancy tripod for all the iPads or phones in your classroom. Have your students design them by themselves using different materials. And like Chris mentioned, you don't need a high budget. You could use anything for stop motion animation. So let's go to Craig, who's going to share some more technical aspects on stop motion.
Thanks, Capo. And so true, right? We need a tripod. We need something to fix our camera with, but it doesn't have to be high tech. So I'll look at some of the tech and not so tech stuff with you now. But definitely you're going to need a tripod. You have to stabilize that camera however you can. So I'll show you an example that I made, and there's links to this, the dimensions and so on. You'll be able to see what that's all about. But this is just a DIY iPad stand. It doesn't have to be device specific, though. You can use it with a tablet of any kind. Android, I'll just clip it with a binder clip, and then you get the idea. I would put my iPad on here, lean against it, facing the camera out, and my clip came undone, of course. And then these handles allow you to shift the camera if you need to. But remembering, we're probably not going to move the camera too much, but if you need to, if I needed to pan in and pan out and so on. So there's an idea, and there'll be links to that you'll be able to see after. Something else just around the house. This is a recipe book holder that I have. It's on my kitchen counter usually. So usually there's a recipe book in there, but you could actually put your iPad on there, and that's another way. And the iPad can go vertically or horizontally. And sorry, I'm getting off camera, but you get the idea. And typically we're working on a tabletop when we're doing this. So you don't really need a really tall tripod. And here's a candelabra idea. Same thing, I would wedge my iPad in there, and same idea. I can keep it stable, shift it if I need to, but it's a nice flat holder for me to keep on my tabletop. And then there's some other little gadgets I found. That's for an iPhone. You just slide your iPhone in there. Same thing, it's just a little piece of plastic to hold it. And like Chris showed you guys before, for your phone, just a shop clamp, or even clothespins. If you have clothespins, the phone's not that heavy, you could actually stabilize it on your tabletop. So that's it for tripods. Let's have a look at some of the apps you can use. One in particular that we use, then I'll show you some pictures about that. So let me just switch cameras here quickly. We'll turn that on. There you go. So hopefully you can see that. So the app I use that I'm going to show you in more detail is this one here, iMotion, for the iOS. And the other one I have beside it is called StopMotion. That one's for the iOS, but it's also for the Android. So you can use that in different places. So that you have some options. So like I said, today we're going to do this one. There's also many others, and we have links in the documentation. Also, there's a StopMotion animator for the Chrome browser. So if you want to do this on a Chromebook or even a desktop computer, you're not limited to a tablet or a phone. So there's a lot of options for that. So let me go into iMotion. You can follow me there. And I just want to show you what the pictures look like, the importance of taking lots of pictures, right? That's going to be key. And I think Chris and Caro both mentioned that. I'll go in this one. So in this example, these are not photographs. Obviously, I just used a Jamboard to make these images of a ball. But you can see at 2 frames per second, I have 8 pictures here of a ball, and I'm going to put it at 12 frames per second like Chris talked about before. You can see how choppy that is. I only have 8 pictures, so it's not really possible for me to show 12 frames per second. I don't have enough frames. So you can see how choppy that is. And I stuck the yellow line in the back there so you can see the exaggeration, but that's simulating a camera moving too much. If you had a stationary camera, it would look much different. So let me show you what that might look like. So here I took 20 pictures, and now those 20 pictures are going 12 frames per second. So a lot cleaner, a lot neater. You can see it's going in a straight line. And I even added the little ellipse at the bottom there to give the effect of a rebound, right? So it looks pretty realistic, whether I slow it down or speed it up. And let's go to something a little more complete. So we'll look at this one. So this is a stop motion I put together with some characters that I moved. And this was actually 75 pictures. And at 12 frames per second, that gives me about a 6-second video. So it's not a long finished video, but it's a bit of a story. There's a chase going on, and it'd be fun to add narration to this, or a soundtrack or so on. So I'll show you what that looks like. So this is in the iMotion app that I did this. I took my pictures, and it's as simple as doing this export. And in the iPad, I can export it automatically. It's all integrated. So I'm just going to send it to my photo library. There's an exporting thing that's happening for those 75 pictures, and it'll take a little while to do that. And then I'll show you after. I'll go into my photo library and you'll see how this will turn up. There you go. So it's all done. I will close that and I'll go into photos, and I can see right down here, my video appeared, and there's my 6 seconds, my 75 photos put into a video that'll take six seconds to play. And the fun thing about having it here now in photos is I have a pause and start feature, which I didn't have in the stop motion. It was just on a loop going back and forth. So this gives me a few more options to play with it. So from here in my photos, again, integrated, I'm going to go into iMovie. So I'm going to jump over to iMovie. There it is. And then to bring that photo session in, that little video clip, I'm going to press the plus sign. And without getting into too much detail, I'll just walk you through it quickly. I'll choose movie. And then these are my photos, my recent photos. And you can see my video is right up there that we just took from iPhoto. So I will select that. And then down here, I think you can see that, I just create the movie. And it's done. My movie's created in iMovie. I can press play and so on. There it is. And then I will get some editing features here, which are pretty advanced. If I select the clip, I can play with the speed. I can put some titles in and that kind of stuff. And you can see here, that microphone allows me to do the narration. And Chris talked about the importance of this clip is 6 seconds long, right? So for me to do a narration in 6 seconds would be pretty tough. So I probably want a longer video clip to work with. But in any case, I could narrate by clicking on that. What I chose to do for this one was in the audio feature right here, I had sound effects. So I could put a soundtrack in the background if I wanted. I can put sound effects. And in my case, I had a dog chasing a cat. So it made sense for me to grab bark. And I'm going to move my microphone over so you can hear the sound effects while I do that. And it's as simple as, so there was the bark. Hopefully you can hear that. I add it to my movie. And now there's the bark. And just to place it where I want, I just press and hold the audio, and then I can drag it along, and you can see the video where exactly I want that bark to be. I drop it in there and it's good to go. So that's the idea of doing it in iMovie. Let me show you a finished product. I'm just going to go to my file folder here, and I'll show you what it looks like, because I actually added some sound effects and a bit of a soundtrack and a title at the beginning, just to show you what's possible with this. And here we go. I'll open that up. Give you some audio to go with it. There you go. So very short film. You get the idea, but it becomes a lot of fun, right? And the students will love adding audio and sound effects and all that kind of stuff and recording their voices. So most important takeaway, I guess, is use a tripod. Make sure you keep that camera stable and take lots of pictures. Don't be shy to use more pictures than you'll ever need. It's going to be a better product in the end. So thanks for doing this, and I'll pass it back to Carol and we'll move this forward.
Thanks, Craig. That was an awesome production. It's incredible that just those 6 seconds was actually 75 images that were combined to make motion. So it's really incredible. And just a reminder that this is a remarkably versatile activity to try at all levels and all subject areas. If you go on our blog, we actually make some curriculum connections, so don't forget to visit us there. Another takeaway, just to remember, you'll only get better. Don't worry about your first production or your students' first productions. After producing your first one, reflect on what you could change the next time. Do it often. Students get better at practicing and they become more competent. So one time isn't enough. You'll see an evolution over time. That's it for us today. Join us for our next OCS live stream. We are going to take a deep dive into exploring lights and shadows. I don't know if it's going to be too bright. There we go, a bit of dinosaur. So join us, Exploring Lights and Shadows, on February 19th at 2 p.m. Also, you could subscribe to our YouTube channel, Learn Quebec, and you'll get updates on our upcoming live streams. Otherwise, quick shout out to our friends at the Exploratorium for their inspiration and great activities. Go visit them. And thank you to Michael Clark, who's in the backstage making this possible.